Who are these people?
That's Eric Adams.
Mayor Eric Adams. So, New York City advocates fear more police violence, homeless criminalization amid forced hospitalizations. I'll read that again. Forced hospitalizations. New York City Mayor Eric Adams issued a directive this week that puts police at the center of renewed efforts to remove people exhibiting signs of mental illness from public spaces. So, yeah. So this is I think I got this from SheerPost, but this is Elizabeth Wheel Greenberg over from the Appeal. So she wants to point out that advocates are raising alarm over New York City Mayor Eric Adams' new directive targeting people with perceived signs of mental illness for removal and forced hospitalization. While Adams has said the policy is intended to help the city's poorest and most vulnerable residents, community groups say the true intent is to disappear homeless people from the city streets and subways. They argue the new standards will only result in further criminalization and police violence against the unhoused population. So, this is from another article, which was at, where's this one from? Links are in the description below for both, by the way, and for all the articles we do. Yes, Truth Out,
right?
So on November 29th, New York City Mayor Eric Adams announced his plan to involuntarily commit large numbers of the city's homeless to mental hospitals. The new policy also expands the use of Kendra's Law. Have you heard of this law, Collin? At all?
I didn't know about it until you told me about it yesterday. But for those who do not know, share.
Yeah. Hold on. So, Kendra's Law, which allows for court-ordered outpatient treatment, this makes it easier to force unhoused people who aren't exiled to a hospital onto tranquilizing drugs, regardless of history or threat of violence. So that's the classic thing, right? You have to be proven to be a harm to yourself or others. That's the classic Section 8. Baker acting, right? Isn't that it? Something like that?
Yeah.
Dad's had to do a few. So, technically, Kendra's Law does not force people to be drugged. Technically. But in reality, psychiatric treatment often offers little else. And people don't follow orders. They are brought by police back to a hospital until they abide, agreeing to take psychiatric drugs. And adhere to the psychiatric's plans is often a condition of being discharged from the hospital. Already, most people committed under this law have never displayed any evidence of violence, and unsurprisingly, due to racist policing practices and racism within the medical system, they tend to be disproportionately people of color. Let's not forget the Tuskegee people, and what happened with them. Or, you know, the countless women whose, fallopian tubes have been removed, against their will. So, yeah, specifically, roughly 35% are black, while only 33% are white. The group of individuals involuntarily committed to hospitals also tend to be disproportionately black and brown. So, New York's outpatient commitment statute is one of its first of its kind. Today, some form of Kendra's Law, or AOT, exists in 47 states and the District of Columbia. So, that's also, you get to deal with that. So
Right.
fun. Just look normal, Collin. Look normal. Don't look crazy. Look normal.
But
So,
it's right. So pause
yes.
1 second. So you know what? Unfortunately, living in DC, I kind of see this all the time, like especially with the homeless population here. Like they do some mess that people get scared, they call the cops, and then the cops, have to deal with the issue. And, I'm not sure what happens to them, but,
Yeah.
But so I see this all the time,
Yeah.
in terms of like how the homeless and those who have mental issues clearly have mental issues in the city. And again, many of them
Well, this
are
goes down
unhoused.
to, I remember, I think it was honestly NPR, which I only am forced to listen to if I'm in the car with my mother.
Mm.
But they talked about how even at like a kindergarten level, black and brown, especially men, end up being deemed like aggressive and problem children a lot
Yeah.
earlier and a lot more
Yes.
frequently than others. Like,
Yeah, I have a story just from yesterday. So I went to my advocacy monthly meeting yesterday and we did a check-in, mental check. Had a colleague at another a charter school who student, not hers, but a student in the school had an episode to the point where, it was, like they called, I forgot who it was, like community services, and they recommended, call the police. And then because the police cannot deal with this child was 11. They arrested her and dragged her out in a gurney because they could not de-escalate her. So the idea that, like, first of all, like, aren't cops supposed to be trained to, well, they don't. Like I just told them myself, they're not trained to de-escalate. But first of all, the idea that you're doing that to an 11-year-old girl, like, you're arresting her. Now, this child probably has going through some trauma in of itself, but the idea of having to be arrested by the cops for essentially having an episode.
Yeah, but that's not traumatic. They give you a lollipop, like you get a sticker. You get to meet the dare dog. Like, you don't want to go meet the dare dog?
Right.
Come on, Collin.
So this is the idea. So this is why, especially, for me and like Savvy was just here, RBN, these are why we're saying defund the police. We need police, community policing. We need, like, you don't need the cops to take care of that. You need mental health specialists, you need social workers in order to take care of that stuff. Cops are not trained, especially our cops, to do that. And you're only adding to the trauma for this poor child and others like that.
Oh, but wait,
you're just gonna.
There's more. There's more. You think that's bad? Like, let's get into the weeds. So in February, so this is because he's Eric Adams is expanding the reach of this law, right? This what law was it? Can you remember? I already have forgotten. That's it. Kendra's law, right? And I covered what that was, right? Apparently some like lady killed herself, I think, and like some stuff came out from that Kendra's law. But I thought I had it in here. In February, the New York State Office of Mental Health published guidance clarifying that a person can be involuntarily hospitalized under state law if they appear to be mentally ill, and display an inability to meet basic living needs, even when there is no recent dangerous act. So because you can't meet basic living needs, like having a home, right? That's what this means, okay? So, at a press conference this week, Adams unveiled a memo stating that the city concurs with the state agency's interpretation and directing police and peace officers, quote unquote, to begin removing any individual who appears to have mental illness and cannot support their basic human needs to an extent that causes them harm. So, civil rights advocates say the directive's vague language gives police carte blanche to detain unhoused people in New York based on arbitrary and potentially inaccurate evaluations of their mental health. To officers, the mayor's guidance serves as a green light that tells them, you have my permission to do it, however you need to do it, to get homeless people off the street, said Lisa Ortega, community organizer with Take Back the Bronx. Don't know if you've heard of them, but so under the mayor's plan, police officers will have prolonged contact with people prior to their hospitalization. The policy requires a peace or police officer to be present at the scene of all involuntary removal attempts to ensure the individual stays on scene. Officers must also escort emergency services personnel on trips to the hospital and ride in the back of a transport vehicle. The escorting officer can leave only after the person has been registered as a patient at the hospital. So cop stays you with that whole trip. One that's not trained in what, Colin? Like, this is all about mental health, right?
Right.
When they know
De-escalation.
absolutely nothing.
Right.
Well, and this is also going to lead to, like, yes, the cop then has to escort someone in a van, in a, like, you know, all the way there to the hospital. Then they get there. Then they're handed off to the state hospital, essentially.
Well, you know what's funny?
So-
Because this just reminded me, like when I was in college, I had mono.
Mm,
So freshman year. So like and it was bad. So I was in the infirmary. Well, I was in the infirmary on campus, but it got to the point where I got so sick I had to be transferred to the hospital for like 2 nights. But then like when they were ready to take me back to my dorm, it was the cops who escorted me. Like they had to put me in their police car, in order to take me back to campus. And it was just
Nice.
kind of like, I mean, I didn't think of it at the time, but it just now thinking about it, it was just kind of like, why would they send the cops in order, because I was going home,
Yeah.
like, but
Well,
I think it's just like anything that goes down, get the cops.
Yes.
And again, the cops are not necessarily trained to do the stuff in a way that gives humanity
Yes.
to people that they're working with and dealing with.
Yeah, let's add
So
extra trauma, with police arresting the mentally ill. Yeah, I mean,
right.
exactly. So Adams has insisted that his directive is an overdue and compassionate response to help people the city has discarded. But to truly help homeless people, they should be given access to housing and community-based services, said Ortega. They make it seem like you cannot get well or get an apartment until you're A, B, and C, but it's really the opposite way around. If you give someone a stable place to put their head and they become conductive to, okay, maybe now we can move forward and recover, it doesn't work the other way around. It just doesn't. So, what did I go too far?
Yeah, you went too far.
How did that happen? Where did I stop?
I
This.
think go forward.
Yes, this.
Forward.
The involvement of law enforcement in these potentially tense interactions only raises the likelihood of arrest and violence, said Renee Carefa Johnson, who works with FWD, a criminal justice reform organization, increasing points of contact with police for communities like Black communities, unhoused communities, brown communities, disabled communities, queer communities, inevitably leads to increased criminalization and state violence, she said. Police are trained in command and control, said Beth Harules, a senior staff attorney with the New York Civil Liberties Union. People who have a disability or are impaired in some fashion, they don't respond simply to command and control. If an officer perceives an individual as aggressive or uncooperative during a removal attempt, they could face criminal charges, which would only entangle them in the legal system and make it harder for them to access housing and support. People in mental health crisis routinely end up getting charged over encounters with police or medical personnel, according to a report published last year by the Disability Rights New York and John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Despite the well-documented risk that police pose to people with mental illness, the mayor's directive does not limit the weapons or force an officer can use during these removals. If you don't immediately comply with a police officer's orders or directive, the situation is immediately escalated. The police officer will just automatically try to put handcuffs on you, said Young-Mi Lee, legal director of criminal defense at Brooklyn Defender Services. Involuntary removals and hospitalizations are already traumatic and often marked by physical conflict, said Timothy Clune, executive director of Disability Rights New York. Given the lack of expertise of these designated to make a determination that one appears to be mentally ill, there is a high likelihood that people with and without such disabilities will be erroneously removed and detained, Clune said in a statement to the appeal. Adams has insisted that his directive is an overdue and compassionate response to help the people the city has discarded, but to truly help homeless people, we read this. This is the last page.
Yes.
So, but yeah, opposite way around on the A, B, and C. Closing thoughts on this, Colin?
Defund the police.
Sure.
Honestly, and yeah, I think it just gives Joe's videos that you played earlier. Those of you who are now just coming in, welcome. If you wondering where Savvy is, she only had an hour to give, so she was here for the 8 o'clock hour, our time. So go back and rewatch to hear Savvy's take on policing and Africa's take on Ukraine. Those are the 2 segments we've done so far. But again, as I said, just yesterday, having to hear of a teacher describing how the cops had to arrest and remove a child from a school because she was having an episode and they couldn't de-escalate her to the point where she was able to kind of function properly.
Yes.
I think just kind of speaks to, how much I think I'm going to be very fair to cops for a quick second.
You don't have to.
I don't have to, but I will for this, and then I'll go back to my original thought of the cops anyway.
Sure.
That's too much that cops have to deal with. Like, cops do not have to be trained. They're not. But we call them for pretty much to deal with everything.
Yes.
We call for them in terms of like fire, depending on where you are, because there may not be enough, fire engine stations to help with an emergency, depending where you live.
Get your cat out of a tree.
Right. Getting cat out of a tree, like simple shit, that it's not, it can be.
They're not capable of being trained in all those things.
Right.
Like they're just not.
Right. But I think the idea is when you're in trouble, call the cops.
Yeah.
Things go down, call the cops. And so I think in a lot of ways, I don't want to say people, but I think intentionally and unintentionally, I think people give cops more power than I think they truly deserve because we rely on them for everything in terms of an emergency. Whereas if we have people who are trained, and then I think that also speaks to the education, like we need more social workers, we need more mental health professionals. And I think looking at our federal government, these are things that Biden should make endorsements for, besides other things.
This is a thing that's possible in 49 states.
Right.
That a mayor could just do.
Right.
Especially ones that want to deal with a homeless problem.
Right.
Like, I don't know, Houston, LA, Chicago, Detroit, like how many we want to go with?
I will want to bet because it's pretty much almost every state, but I would bet, you could basically say this is a federal law. You can basically say that.
Generally, yeah. Or this Kendra's law, right? That modifies
is it not? Probably what Hawaii?
Probably.
I'm just guessing here.
Yeah, like where are we gonna move? Like where are we moving to? Yeah.
But I think these are the things that I think about, and I think especially in terms of education, and I think especially in higher ed, these are like policies that Biden himself, especially given his wife,
yes,
who is a teacher,
yes,
professor, these are the things that she should be advocating for. Like we need more teachers, we need more social workers, we need more mental health professionals. Like make it so that it's easier for people who want to do it to get into it and then pay them or forgive their student debt so that you have interest in people wanting to go in these professions and they come out and they're able to tackle a lot of these issues that the cops are not necessarily able to deal with. Like,
well,
these are the things that
me.
I think.
I mean, like, I've talked about training police in jujitsu for a long time. What I'm worried about is that this law will unequivocally cause more deaths because cops do not know how to physically control anyone, like at all. In most places, they get barely any training in hand-to-hand grappling in any way, shape, or form. And that's if they're lucky. Most of them have to get that on their own because they realize they need it, right? Because otherwise, what's left in the toolbox, Colin? Like, if you're fearful of your life as a cop, you're allowed to, like, which usually people start doing that fight or flight thing when what's called the amygdala hijack happens, which is whether you have had a perceived or actual loss of control. That adrenaline starts kicking in, right? So it turns into survival. So you're just going to go to the thing on the hip. That's all that's left for you, generally, which happens way too many times for us to count. And this is just going to get more of that.
Right.
For someone who's just homeless.
Sorry, Markia Voss in the chat, she had a question. She said, can you invite some of the defund speakers from RBN General Strike Summit? Yeah, we can.
Would love to. Yeah, we'll reach out. So we're in talks with Meadows to get some people and ballot initiatives over as well.
Yeah.
So that'll be good.
I have a feeling, well, I said this. I feel like really for 2023, which is in a few weeks. Oh my God. Like, which will kind of, I think, might be a good segue into our last segment of the night. But
yes,
but we really need to focus on organizing around policies, and I think within the local and state levels in particular, so that people know how to manage and kind of control that and kind of be empowered to be able to speak out on those issues and own it. That could be elevated up to the federal level. And by then, you know, the idea is that you'll have people who are willing to be in leadership, whether it is city council, wherever it is mayor or whatever else within local state level or state senate, to be able to better advocate for these issues within states. That could, those people could eventually maybe push into the federal plane as well. You know, so I think we really need to, a lot of these issues as far as ballot initiatives, defund the police, reparations, all this stuff, Medicare for all this, like 10 demands for justice. Yes, Eric, thank you. Like all of this stuff we really need to start organizing around, you know. So really, I think, honestly, in my mind, 2023, in my mind, is like the year of organization. But I think learning what organization is and what it isn't. And I know we talk about organization on the show quite a bit, but I think we really need to kind of develop that into practice of what that means on the left and what it means in terms of having a long-term goal and really thinking strategically of what needs to happen in order for these things to get implemented. So I don't think we really talk about this, how to do it.
Right.
So, you know, but I think we need to have, I think, on the left, guidance as to what that can look like on a local level. So basically, fuck the federal level, because they're not helping us. You don't have access to them, and they ignore you when you do try to, if you are lucky enough to talk to a congressman or a senator and just be like, these are the issues that are important to me. These are the things that I advocate for. And they will just laugh or just slam the door in your face, as we have seen.
I mean, as you know, Ed would like to remind us that the only federal solution is lava based. So, you know, but you want to show the people how not to do it.